I'd like to welcome our consultant, Keith, who's here to help us today to look at our options, specifically around the expiry of our operating agreement. Welcome, Keith.
Well, thanks for having me back for the second session. We are continuing today to talk about the end of your operating agreement, which is, as you know, coming up in 2016. Last time we took things at a high level. We set the context, how things are going to play out for you. This time we're going to get into your numbers. And as we saw last time, you're probably going to have a deficit. So we've got to talk about what that's going to mean and poke at that a bit more. So you're going to have to forgive me here because the operating agreement, my eyes expired a while ago. And what I'm going to do to make it easy for everybody is play on the computer, but I'll put everything up in the screen here for you so that you can see. And that'll be more important, as you'll see later as we start playing with some of those numbers. So what you see here are the basic data for your building. We covered all that last time, so I'm not going to go through the details again. What I have done is I plugged these numbers directly into the tool, and that's what I'm here to walk you through. The ONPHA has a very user-friendly tool with a very user-friendly guide for you to set everything up and to walk through. So with these numbers, we'll go now to the actual ONPHA tool and see what happens. Okay, so this is you guys. We've got your project up here, the program that we talked about, the end of your agreement, and 2012, we do have current budget data, so that's what you plugged in, the number of your RGI and market units, and your rental revenue. So we talked before about your average rents. This is how those average rents extrapolate out into annual revenue. Your major cost categories, your mortgage payment, and this is critical. Again, what we talked about last time, you are making your required allocations to your replacement reserve, but your BCA says you should be putting in another $60,000. Okay? So that's all your base data that you're locking in. You notice that we had indexes for inflation there. You can take your best stab at those. You can change them according to your own risk parameters. But it's those indexes that give you all the numbers. So the 2012 picks up the base here, and they carry through. I'm going to walk you through this screen. All that base level data is up on the top here. And again, that's locked in, so that's not going to go away. You can always refer to that. But on the bottom, and this is where you're going to be focusing in terms of your projections, you've got all your revenues, all your expenses, again just picking up on that last slide and carrying them forward according to those indexed rates. And now we're looking at where your risk is. So your net operating income is simply the difference between revenue and expenses. You've got your mortgage payment, and you've got your pre-subsidy cash flow. So right now, you've got a pre-subsidy cash flow of minus $170,000. That all balances off this year because you've got a $170,000 subsidy coming in. You're breaking even this year. Looking forward, you've got a modest subsidy coming in if you add in that $170,000. Now your tough part comes in. With that replacement reserve contribution, which you're not making, and somehow we've got to figure out how to get there, if you add in another $60,000 or really take off that $60,000, you are looking at a major deficit situation. So by rights, you should be in deficit. You're looking at a big deficit now. You come up to 2017, the first year after your agreement expires, you've got a modest deficit, so a big improvement. The whole idea of this model, of this tool, is to show you how the world works without subsidies. So there's no subsidies showing up in this. If we carry it forward here, you can see this whole thing is structured around 5-year chunks of time. This 5-year chunk is the transition period. So it's the years immediately before the expiry of your operating agreement and the years immediately after, and you can see that deficit is carrying forward. Okay? The next page in this is the one that you are going to be using in order to figure out how you fix it. So we've got, again, all your core data is here and here. Your base data is locked in here. And what you can adjust is down here, and that has to do with the number of year-to-income units or the rents, which then translate into your revenues. If you reduce your number of RGI units, increase your number of market units, you're going to have more revenue. If you increase the average rent per unit, either on the market side or the RGI side, and it will allow you to do either or both, again, you're going to increase your revenue. So this is focusing on what you have some discretion over. You have to make a choice, but you have some discretion. So let's start playing with those. Let's say, for instance, that we take your 25 RGI units and we drop down to 20. We have to balance that, and if you don't do that, you get that little error message there that you can see. So the model again is friendly. It tells you if you've made a mistake. It won't let you proceed with the wrong number. So we've got to balance that with 80. Right? And we enter that. Okay. Now what you've got down here, and I'll show you the respective lines, adjustments to rent revenue. So the first field here is revising that unit mix. That's what we've just done. The second area is revising the rent revenue, and the third is working with both of them together. So we have just increased our rental revenue by virtue of having more market units. So what that's done is we don't have a deficit there anymore. Our cash flow with that 5 units is enough to produce a surplus. Not a big surplus. You're not going to go to Hawaii on it, but you've got $1,000, $3,400. So you've got an opportunity there in making that adjustment to break even. Let's say you don't want to do that. You don't want to reduce your number of geared to income units. So we put them back up to 25 and 75, and we decide we want to maybe be a bit more aggressive on the market rent side. Who wants to give you a number for a higher rate of market rent increase?
Maybe we could charge 1% more?
Okay, so you're going to have to test that out, obviously. So again, this is just to allow you to experiment, but before you make any final decisions on the market rent increase, for instance, you're certainly going to want to do some market research, test out what's going on in the neighborhood and see if you can get away with that. But let's say you do want to. You'll have to make an adjustment in here and plug in the actual rent number. So it's showing average rent per unit. You change that. So a 1% increase is going to take you from, right now we're showing $10,599. A 1% rent increase is going to take that to $10,705. Okay? So that's annual rent per unit, and the program will multiply that all through. So what you can see, what we've done is we've adjusted this. If you go back to where we were last time on the unit mix, you can see we're back to that deficit, right? But if we look at the average revenue per unit here, based upon increasing the market rent, we've still got a deficit coming out of that. It's a smaller deficit, but there's still a deficit. So what if you do both? We come back to, let's take it back to, let's say, okay, the objective here is to break even. We want to minimize the pain to our geared to income tenants as much as possible. So rather than 25, maybe we go 22 and 78. Plug that in. Okay. So we still got deficits here and here, but taken together, now we've got a surplus. Right? So again, you can play these things off in different ways against each other to come up with where you want to be. So you can have an interaction, if you will, between your policy objectives, your goals for your organization, and where you need to be financially. Any appetite for maybe increasing the geared to income side of things?
No, I don't think so, no.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that's decent of you. But that means that now you're going to be confined on the revenue side to doing what we were trying to do here, playing around with either the market rents or the actual number of geared to income tenants. And of course, there are ways of phasing that in. You don't have to kick anybody out. You can do that through transition. But again, this is all about planning. If you're going to think about doing that, you don't wait until the end of your operating agreement and say, okay, how do I go from 25 to 22 or 20 geared to income tenants? Try to figure out how you're going to do it over time, and that way you're not hurting people. So let's go to the rest of the tool quickly. I just want to show you what it will do. Again, as you start playing with this and exploring other options, some of this might help you, it might not. It's here for you. It's very powerful. This one, if you got somebody who's determined to look at all the detail, you got annual numbers. What you saw so far were the 5-year numbers. This is annual. So you can check out what's happening from year to year. So it takes all that input from the earlier stuff and plays it through annually. And this one you may or may not need. Based upon the way we handled the Schedule 3, we seem to come up with some fairly simple solutions. But if things get more complicated and you start playing around with, well, I want to try this scenario, I want to try that scenario, what you can do with this one is use this particular schedule and export it to another Excel spreadsheet. Again, the guidelines are there. It'll help you do that if you don't have the skills to do that. And then in one spreadsheet, you can have everything showing. That's the model. Those are your numbers. This model does not allow you to directly experiment on the cost side of things. As we talked about last time, you're already pretty lean and mean, so you're not going to be playing around with your costs too much. But if you're determined that no, you've got to push it that harder, you can, a little bit more complicated, but you can go back and you start with some of the input cost data and allow that to flow through. Again, the guideline will take you through that. So I'm going to turn right now to the capital reserves. We've looked at playing around with the numbers. Now maybe we need to look at what we're going to do in a more focused way on the capital side. As we talked about last time, you have not accounted for the impact of your SHRP work. In a nutshell, what did you do there?
We replaced the fridges.
Okay. Was that part of your BCA?
I'm not really sure.
Oh, well, then that's going to be the first thing for us to check, or for you to check. A lot of BCAs don't deal with appliance replacement. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes people replace it through operating, sometimes they replace them through capital. Even if it was, I have to assume that the replacement that you did do, you took advantage of SHRP after all, that replacement was ahead of the actual planned cycle. So if that was the case, even if it is in your BCAs, you're not going to get the full financial benefit of that. On the other hand, you may get some energy savings out of that, and maybe you haven't figured out how that's going to play through. You presumably got more energy efficient fridges with this installation. So you're going to save in your operating costs, and again, that's something that you should be inputting into this end of operating agreement analysis. You're scrounging for dollars right now, guys. You're very close to the wire, as you've seen, so anything that you can do will make a difference to your bottom line.
So how would we know that?
For your fridge consumption, there's usually your supplier or the manufacturer will have the actual consumption data, the average consumption data anyway, for those appliances. So I'd go back and ask them and see if they can give you the consumption data for your old units as well, or maybe you have to track down the supplier for those. Push comes to shove, you'll get an engineer, but I would start with the vendor that you got those fridges from.
I can do that.
Great. So you've still got that the BCA issue to check, though, see if they're even in there or not. I'd suggest your property manager should be pretty familiar with what's actually in the BCA, and just have them see whether the fridges are in or out. And if they are in, have her call the engineer who did the BCA and simply get them to recrunch the number. I mean, they should be able to do that pretty simply if they got a nice spreadsheet too, and just say, no, here's the new energy number for that. How does that feed through? What's happening to the date in the cycle if you've got fridges compared with where they were going to be replaced? Did you do anything else with SHRP?
We replaced the windows.
Okay, so windows for sure were in your BCA, right? Do you know if you replaced them according to the cycle in the BCA, or was it ahead of time? Or?
They were due in 2 years.
So that should be pretty close. You should be able to milk out most of the benefit of that. And again, that if you can put through the numbers from the BCA here, you'll be able to pick that up. Again, the idea is that you were able to use that SHRP money to replace money that this is saying you needed to use from your replacement reserves. Well, now you don't. So that's going to improve that deficit situation for you. Again, maybe there's some energy savings there. That gets a little bit more complicated. You may or may not have specs on the old windows. In that case, I'd suggest you actually get a hold of an engineer, maybe the supplier of those windows, or maybe the architect who gave you the specification for the new windows, and see what they've got. But I'd start with that, and again, try to get those energy data for the windows, the difference in the windows, and see how that might feed through. You might be able to keep track through utility bills, but trying to isolate what's going on with the window compared with the weather is a nightmare. So see what you can pick up in the window. And that, again, will allow you to do those long-term projections that this end of operating agreement spreadsheet will do and show you where you can save. So that seems to be it for SHRP. Have you got a good maintenance plan?
Yeah, we do. And it was recently updated.
So there may not be much more you can get savings-wise on the replacement reserve side in terms of spending more in maintenance versus spending more in capital. But it's probably worth ensuring that you're actually using best practices in your maintenance plan. You know, hopefully you're right and you do have a good one. I'll forward some material from ONPHA to you in terms of best practices, and you can simply check what you are doing. You should have a nice schedule of your maintenance plan, what you're doing there, and check against those best practices. Your BCA itself, the validity, as I said, the BCAs tend to be just geared to industry standards. They don't use destructive testing. In other words, they're not tearing apart your building to see how it's actually working. They're not looking at that specific piece of equipment. They're looking at that piece of equipment in a generic sense. So they don't take account of what you have actually been doing day to day in your maintenance, whether you're extending the life or, you know, letting it run down more quickly. The BCA it's probably okay over the long haul, but it may not be telling you how the dollars are actually going to play out over the period, especially with your operating agreement coming up so soon, how those dollars are actually going to play out. So do you have an actual capital plan that is not based exclusively on that BCA?
No, we don't.
Okay, so that's going to be a problem that's going to take a while to sort out. It's an important input for this. I think that's a session for another day. Again, ONPHA can steer you to some resources, and I suggest you do that as quickly as possible. We need to get on that, but we need to integrate those numbers, practical numbers, not just the theoretical BCA numbers, into this analysis. It could be better or it could be worse than what you're seeing here, but we need to know so that you can make an informed decision. In the meantime, you know, if you're going to get that answer back soon, great, but if it's going to take longer to get it back, I would suggest that you meet soon to figure out what your priorities are, some contingency priorities. What are you going to do? Is it going to be the rents? You know, is it going to be the RGI? Where are you going to focus your efforts to make sure you're okay, so that when your numbers do land, you can just go, now it's this, now it's that. So I think that's probably all we can do for today until you come back with some of those numbers and some schedule of that, and we'll get back at this.